I invite anyone in the room to contribute their expertise as well. I've got a few slides prepared on my own personal tips. Is better. Oh, it should go green with that. Oh, yeah, green. It's green now. Yeah, so happy to keep this pretty informal. Just pop your hand up at any point. Okay, I just wanted to start by saying that whether you succeed or fail, inverted commas in grants doesn't say anything about your worth or value as a person. And to be honest, sometimes I think it doesn't even say much about your worth as a scientist either. We all know, well, hopefully you all know the system can be really, it's a lottery. So that's my caveat at the beginning. I'm also aware that, I'm not sure if anyone in the group is affected, but that IT's grants were made known to applicants yesterday. And I realise I'm speaking from a place of privilege where I have a job regardless of whether I get a grant or not. That's been the case for me for about the last 10 years. So yeah, I'm aware that this whole topic can be very difficult for some people who are relying on grants for their jobs. But we would love to push the frontier of science sometimes. So I had a quick look at the grants that I submitted in 2025. The ones involved are the ones that I was leading, and the others are the ones where I had significant input. So 15 grants went in, 5 were successful. They're all the small ones, but 116 in total. And I had a look in Sapphire since May 2024, so about the last 18 months. I've been on 13 applications in Sapphire, and none of those have been successful as yet, although there's secret funding. So just want to put into perspective that we write a lot of grants and we get a few of them occasionally. Oh, yeah, good question. So there were some that didn't end up getting submitted. Yeah, so the one in the Waikato grant, for example, we got quite far into trying to set up a cooperation with a group in New Zealand and realised that we weren't ready to submit a grant. The NRFF one, I guess, was the one that went the furthest. I abandoned that only days before it was due, and that was because we realised we had a significant lack in one particular area, which was the microbiome. We didn't have a CI with those skills, and we felt that that was a deal breaker for that grant. So we, despite the fact that it was almost finished, we decided not to submit. Yeah, so sometimes that happens as well. Okay. So I was going to share some personal tips from my own success, and I wanted to start by saying that I started in a system that was very different. So 20 to 25 years ago, grant success used to be around 25% in HMRC, at least. And small grants were easier to come by. It's just a very different system now than it was then. And success begets success. And so I think for the earlier career members of the audience, don't be disheartened, but also don't sort of look at more senior people and think, how come they have all this success? You know, we started at a time when the system was really different. But I would encourage you to start small and start now. Like when somebody asked me the other day, when's the right time to start writing grants? Today. Start writing grants today. So just a little history. In terms of my NHMRC history, I received an NHMRC scholarship for my PhD. So right from the early stages, I was already like successful in that system. they used to offer travelling awards for research, and all of those with PhD, and I was listed as an AI on a project grant. So those things I think all helped me in that system back then. My first actual grant of my own was about a year into my postdoc. I was there, I went looking to see what was the very first one, $8,600. So you got to start somewhere, start small. Practice, practice, practice. The more you write, the better you get at writing. The more you read other people's grants, the better you get at writing grants as well. Ask others to provide feedback. And if you can get time away or quarantine some time, by that I mean that whole days or series of days, and that's really helpful, especially for big grants. And this is just a graph I already had from my promotion application last year to show you the ups and downs of grants. So I'm not sure if I got any grants in 2012, or maybe they were so small they didn't show up. But basically, we're always getting grants. Some years we have a big spike, and other years we go lots of years with no spikes. So that's just to show that, you know, it's a very up and down process. So that's all I'm going to say about sort of my own experiences. I've tried to come up with some general considerations and tips from here. So the first one here is how you write a grant is not how you write a paper. And I guess that was something Bronwyn mentioned yesterday, in the sense that when we write papers, we're often trying to be very conservative, you know, we're trying to say this is what we've shown, but we don't want to overinflate the importance of our work. When you're writing a grant, you've got to really sell yourself, so you kind of do the opposite. Get yourself onto review panels. Reading, I find anyway, that reading other people's grants really helps you to see what works and what's just okay. Like most people that submit to NHMRC are going to write a good grant, but when you read a lot of them, it helps you to see what makes a grant excellent over just being good. Make sure your research profile is up to date. I would start with your institutional profile, but then different people have different opinions about where else you should be. And these are some that my team suggested: LinkedIn, ResearchGate, and there were others. And I'd be curious to know, probably Dennis and Vanessa in particular, do you guys have particular, like Scopus or Skybar, do you have other places where you particularly try to keep your profile up to date? Google Scholar, any of those things? Yeah, neither am I, which was, I was kind of surprised.
Another one is
HMRI profile is another one. Yes, yeah, the union again. I find that if I Google someone, the first thing that comes up generally is their institutional profile. So it's good to have that up to date. And some of these others might be. What about you, Dennis? Do you?
Yeah, mostly institutional one.
Institutional one, yeah.
The other thing I usually look at when there's a promotion application or when there's
Yes.
going on. So,
Yeah, because I guess the point is that the reviewers may choose to look you up, and so you want to make sure you the appropriate presence there. Sorry, Kathy, I'm having trouble interacting with Zoom as well, but I see you've got your hand up. Did you want to just unmute and speak? And
yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was just gonna, I was laughing over here because when you guys, I'm always Googling all of you guys. So if you could keep yourselves up to date, that'd be good. LinkedIn and the University of Newcastle, I always jump in on them. And HMRI, just saying.
Good. Oh, that's helpful to know what people are Googling. Thanks, Kathy. Start grants with the people.
Sorry, can I speak to that as well?
Please do.
Sorry, I couldn't figure out where to put my hand up. And sorry guys, I've got a cold, so you're not going to see me. But if the research profile one, I find really important. If you're the person writing the grant, the main person writing it, and you've got a bunch of CIs and AIs on there that may or may not have given you their information, like their 1,000 characters or their 10 best papers. Even with all the best intentions, sometimes people just don't come through, or if they do come through, they don't give it, they haven't really given you their best, or in my opinion. And so then you go and look them up and find out, like one person I recently had on my application, he didn't even tell me that he had this most brilliant paper that had all these citations. It was really high field weighted citation index. I found it myself by looking at him up on Scopus, and I'm like, hello, we should be putting this in. So for me, it was about the people who had the good profiles where I could find them quite easily. Then it was really easy for me to kind of make them sparkle more in my application. So that is why I brought this point up when I mentioned it to Vanessa yesterday.
Thank you, that's helpful context. So for longer grants, I like to make the first page like a mini standalone summary. That was just something that came into my head last night. I apologise for the rushed nature of my notes and slides. So if we move on to some more specific things, I guess, read the guidelines or know your audience and address what they want directly. So I've got an example of this from one of my grants. So this is a MRFF chronic respiratory diseases grant. This was a successful grant. So the text in italics is where I'm like telling the reviewer that I am addressing the objectives of the scheme and the stream within the scheme. And you can see that this one was very specifically about treatable trait precision medicine approaches. So I've already said in the first sentence, treatable traits 3 times. And at the end of the paragraph, I'm saying this addresses the intended outcome of the grant scheme by supporting implementation. I've already mentioned implementation, asthma disease assessment, treatments and outcomes. I've mentioned reducing future asthma risk, improving the health of others with asthma, reducing exacerbations. So directly addressing those specific criteria. Start early. A rushed grant is usually not an outstanding grant. It's often a good first step, but there's been plenty of times where I've written grants with 3 weeks or less to go. I'm not sure if any of those ones have been successful. I think maybe once, but this year when I wrote my investigative grant, I actually followed the college in HMRI had like a support program that involved like weekly check-ins about various aspects of the grant, and I followed their sort of timeline, which was probably more like 2 to 3 months out. That was a much better way to do it than being stressed out of your mind 3 weeks before something's due. So good planning is always a good idea. Avoid abbreviations and too much jargon. I noticed this just last week, marking 25 medical student reports that were on all sorts of different topics. It's really off-putting when the jargon is not something you're used to seeing, or the abbreviations are not things that you're used to reading. And often these like if you're putting in a fellowship application, for example, you're not necessarily going to get somebody who's an expert in your area. I mean, obviously the bigger schemes are trying to get reviewers with expertise in your area, but they might be an expert in asthma, but not in pregnancy. So I don't want to be using pregnancy jargon or abbreviations that they're not going to be used to. Because that just, as a reviewer myself, that would just put me off and make me feel frustrated that I can't understand what they're talking about. Get feedback from your friends, your colleagues, your mentors, definitely your co-investigators beforehand. I still remember the first big grant, the first NHMRC project grant I wrote in my early postdoc years, and there was a guy called Professor Alastair Sim, he's no longer at the university, but he, there must have been some sort of faculty program where he offered to review my grant. I just remember how helpful that was. And he used to do cancer research, so he's well outside the field. It was super helpful to get someone outside the field to look at it. Often the university or HMRI will provide those kind of services to help look at your grant. Hey Mike, please join the table. We're just doing an informal thing. Please pipe in whenever you have something to say. And definitely proofread before submission. I also personally hate spelling mistakes and typos. So, you know, again, recruit your friends to help you read your grant before it goes in. Look at other successful grants. So you can do this at the uni. The research office will give you access to some grants that have been successful in the past, or just ask people. I've never had anyone turn me down when I've asked if I could look at their grant. So I think most people are pretty willing to share. Utilise any assistance offered by the uni or HMRI. As I was saying, I found that really helpful this year. And these are sort of more general as well. Establish the need for your research idea with a strong significant statement. Highlight how your research is innovative or will lead to translational impact and how it's driven by community needs. So that last point, I guess, is how I've noticed the landscape change. There's much, much more focus now on translation, impact, and consumer involvement. So these things have become much more important. And certain schemes like the Ideas Grant scheme will want you to show how the work is innovative specifically. The clinical trials cohort scheme now has 3 pages, I think it was, at least 2, for you to write about your consumer engagement. So it's really important to have done that work and to be able to address those particular things. I've written this tip again. How you write a grant is not how you write a paper. I guess the point here is that you need to not only convince the reader that the work is worth doing, but that you can do the work. So you need to be able to demonstrate feasibility. And if you're running a fellowship, you need to also convince the reader that you're the best person to do this work. So another example from an older grant, older fellowship that was successful, you can see that I've got I'm ideally placed to carry out this work, etc. And this is a more recent application that is still pending. But just really establishing that, and throughout this application, for example, I reiterated this at each point that I described my different studies. I'm well suited to undertake this project because of these reasons. Use figures wherever possible. There's nothing worse than 5 pages, 9 pages, 20 pages of text with no figures in them. So this is an example of one that I did for the MRFF successful grant. It was essentially summarising. I like to have one figure that summarises the project plan. This one's a little different in that it's summarising treatable traits in asthma and pregnancy. So I've put the traits that we already know about, that I've described in the text on the left, and the ones that we're going to look at in the grant on the right. But sometimes I'll have a more of a timeline approach if I've got a study that's looking at pregnancy and childhood, for example, where I try to put the figures, the aims and the studies on various parts of the diagram. Be judicious for the use of your bold, underline, and italics. I do use those things, usually bold. Some people find that really annoying. And so I guess there's different opinions among reviewers, but at least be careful not to overdo it, but also highlight your really key points. I heard somebody once say that if you are going to bold certain things, the reviewer should be able to go from one bold sentence to the next, all the way through your document, and have an idea of what the whole grant is about. So that's an interesting way to think of it. Yes, pilot data is important for most schemes. I think in the ideas grant scheme, technically, is it ideas? You don't have to have pilot data. But generally, you want to be able to show that you or your team are the experts in the field, and that you have either done work that leads up to this idea, or you have started dabbling in it and you've got some pilot data. One of the ways that I have shown in the past our expertise is putting CI numbers in brackets after any reference that involves someone on the CI team. So you can see that here. It does take up a little bit of extra space, but I personally like this approach because every time you read a statement, you know, oh, that's the work that the CIs have done, as opposed to other work. Some people just bold the reference list with what the CIs have been on, but I personally think it's useful to have it throughout the text. So yes, grants are more than just the proposal though. So there's other things to consider, like choosing your team. It's important to consider that you have all the right expertise that's needed on that team. And also I feel now there seems to be more, people want to see that you've included EMCRs as well, and that there's mentoring opportunities and pathways within the team. Does anyone else have any comments about choosing the team?
Maybe just to ensure that each team member has an actual role in the grant. So it used to be you would add like big name CIs with lots of applications, but you couldn't actually see what their contribution would be. So making sure it's really evident what each person will do for the grant.
It's an excellent one, yes. Any other thoughts on the team?
Yeah, I have a thought.
Excellent, thank you.
Bronwyn here. Actually, I want to just reiterate Vanessa's point, because I was on an ideas grant that didn't get up yesterday, and that was one of the comments, that there was too many people and then they overlapped with what they could do, so they didn't know why they were all on there. But I also wanted to say, just considering putting consumers on in some form as well, because that's becoming more and more important. So there's a PI or a CI or an AI.
That's right, yeah, having consumers as CIs or AIs is becoming more and more important as well. Mark, did you?
Yeah, just reiterating, we also had an ideas grant knockback, and one of the comments was around not having an ECR as a CI. Yeah, so we had some MCRs, but no ECRs, so that was picked up on. Yeah. And with preliminary data for ideas, it's not necessary, but I think it really helps. So we had a comment on that as well. It would be nice if you had some preliminary data. So they don't always strictly follow the guidelines, but you can't blame them, because when you're looking at feasibility, preliminary data does a lot to help to establish that.
That's right, yeah. And, you know, reviewers have been around for a long time. They are used to seeing certain things. They expect to see pilot data, even if it's not technically required. Yes, so there's also your track record. So in some schemes, so if I think to the clinical trials and cohort scheme, everybody had to choose their top 10 publications in the last 10 years, as well as provide a one-page track record statement. I guess my thoughts on this are, you know, there's different approaches to choosing your top 10 publications. I think the message I got from Luke Wolfenden's really helpful learn at lunch was not to put too many systematic reviews in there. That was one lesson I took away. And again, this is something where I found it helpful to talk that through with a mentor and have them help me think through what the best options are. I think it's helpful if you can organise a grant so that all the track records are in the same format. I think that's a bonus. So they've all got the same kinds of subheadings, the same layout, and again, that makes it easier for the reviewer. Any comments on this particular one? Dennis, do you have any thoughts?
I think if there is any research translated to the practice, you should choose that publication, and you can say that this research is actually implemented. Yeah. Otherwise, maybe I don't know, first order publications or senior order publications, best to put it as a 10 best publications. High impact publications, if you have JAMA, put it that. Yeah.
Thanks, Dennis.
I was just going to add that one thing I've noticed that I do now is I probably approach this differently depending on what the application is for. So for my investigator, I really just wanted to make sure that they were first or senior author publications with higher field weighted citation index and citations. Whereas with the CRE, which I recently submitted, I actually took a few of those first or senior author out and did some second authors that were really globally impactful. And I could have had those for the investigator grant, but having failed 6 times, I repeatedly, say, despite having 9 out of the 10 first or senior authors, I would have expected more first or senior author papers. So for that, I only put in first or senior.
Okay, right. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, it definitely should be different for each application. You shouldn't just have your standard top 10 publications. So some of the MRFF schemes now are very specific. So one of the ones I put in this year was mental health and climate change, TES. And so for that grant, I was choosing more like bushfire papers because they were the relevant ones. Yeah. Planning your budget. Dennis gave an excellent learn at lunch. I can't remember if it was this year or last year. So I feel like go back and listen to that talk because Dennis is the budgeting king by the look of that. But don't forget that as part of a grant, you're going to have to plan your budget. And even CREs now require you to put in a budget, which wasn't the case before, or to at least address that aspect. So yeah, I guess it's more like don't forget to do your budget. Make sure it's realistic. Back in the olden days, like with BLT's grant, for example, in 2014, the budget got cut by 30%. That was sort of a normal expectation, which makes it really hard to then do the grant. Fortunately, these days, it seems that your budget's either accepted or it's not. Like you will get the amount you asked for. So make sure it is realistic. That does get tricky with personnel because of in the NHMRC schemes, at least, you have to select a personnel support package. And the highest one, I think, pays maybe 120,000 or something like that, which is clearly not enough money to actually pay an experienced postdoc. So I would love to know if people have any tips or what do other people do in this scenario. So in my MRFF for treatable traits, I chose the option of having the FTE be realistic, but that meant that the dollars was not realistic. And I sort of had in my head, I didn't want the whole grant amount to go over $2 million because I thought maybe then it would appear to be too much money for what it was giving, but now that I have to run this grant with the amount I asked for, I sort of regret that, but I'm not sure the best approach. Vanessa, do you, Mike's got some ideas, great.
Not sure if I know the best approach, but I would advise trying to get advice from the research grants office as soon as you can as to what their expectations are in terms of salary gap for grants like ideas grants, where, you know, like you say, the PSP doesn't cover what's required. No, not for ideas grants. They won't do that. So, and it varies a bit from year to year, the hoops that they make you jump through. But generally speaking, they require you to commit to saying that the gap will come from either existing funds, or you have to try to sneakily build the gap into other items in your budget, which again, you run the risk of making it less competitive because you're not necessarily delivering the sort of value on those things. So it is a bit of a problem, yeah. But there's been a lot of like last minute things I've noticed over the last sort of 4 years of ideas grants where the policy seems to change. So if you can get that advice earlier, you'll avoid some headaches. Yeah.
Yeah, I think taking advantage of the supports and infrastructures that are in place within our local environment. So for example, I'll put in a $30,000 database development, knowing it'll probably cost $4,000, but they'll accept a $30,000 one. We don't pay for consumables as part of our grants, so making sure you kind of bump up the consumables. We don't necessarily pay for processing, so making sure that, you know, that's fully budgeted. So yeah, sneaking it in, but also understanding what we might be able to get by without having to pay from the grant.
Good tips, yes. And I mean, as long as you can justify a full-time position for X, then maybe at the end of the day, you employ someone 0.6 or 0.8 to do that job. But yeah, it's all going to be very well justified. Was there more thoughts over this side? Dennis, did you have thoughts?
No, the same things like this 37% overhead on cost of the university, they will take it. So need to consider that one. Yeah, I think that's the main things there.
Addressing risk mitigation. So this is now very clearly spelt out in many of the schemes where you have to actually address this. Sometimes in the form of a table or just text, but it's important to show that you've thought about the potential risks and have ways to mitigate them. Often that involves governance structures and things like that. Creating a timeline, again, that will speak to the feasibility of how you're going to get this proposal done. Make sure you incorporate consumer input or your stakeholder engagement. Yeah.
I just wonder if Elle wanted to say a couple of words about that.
Yes.
Having sat on the panel as the
Yes.
consumer advisor.
And again, Eleanor gave an excellent presentation at a Learn at Lunch, so go back and watch that. But yes, please give us some tips about the consumer.
I think the best way to start is really involve the consumer from the very beginning, getting their thoughts as early as they can. So then that shows that from the very start of the conception of your proposal, that consumers are fully embedded, and then you'll be surprised how much they would be able to contribute in weaving their thoughts and actually developing the grant. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I like to include quotes where I can that show, you know, that the consumer really thinks this is important. Mhm.
I'm also.
Yeah.
Also, I think if you can, link it to say, because I think the thing about the consumer involvement is the authenticity. So what Elle said about, engaging consumers from the start is important. But having consumer engagement as part of your research program and demonstrating that you can do that, that you do that, on a routine basis. So for example, on the severe asthma website and the treatable trait website, we actually have a consumer reference group and the roles and functions and people listed, so they can see we're not just saying it, that it actually exists.
Yes, evidence for things is also becoming more and more important. So we're going to finish with questions. So maybe I've got a few that we can answer, but if anyone around the table has a question, now is your chance to ask. And we can gather the collective expertise and try and give an answer. Does anyone have a question about grants? If not, I'll go to my pre-prepared list. What do you think? How do I know if I should go for this particular grant scheme or not? I think I'm interpreting this question. This was the one that I did get in advance. So in other words, I think, how do I know if this idea is suited to an ideas grant, or should it be in a clinical trials or cohort grant, or should it be whatever else, another scheme? And I've had varying advice on this over the years. So for example, the clinical trials and cohort studies scheme has a really low success rate, like around 5%. So I have had people say before that it's a waste of time. don't even bother. However, I've also been in a situation where a particular idea had been unsuccessful at Ideas Grant before, but probably suited the cohort scheme. So that's something we've since tried, but it is a tricky decision, and it does kind of link in with the second question. So I'll put that one up as well, which is, how do you know when to prioritise grant writing over doing some other output like a paper? We all have limited time, and you could literally spend the whole year just writing grants, but we also need to write papers and finish off projects and so on. So, you know, is it a waste of time to write a clinical trials and cohorts grant when you could have just finished a paper? I'm not sure. I don't know the answer, but what do people think? Has anyone got an opinion on these?
I don't think it's a waste of time, because the thing is that we can use that in some other schemes if it is not successful. I was actually successful in a clinical trials grant when I was in the National Drug and Alcohol Research Center. So that's actually like a startup, I think 2 months or something, and submitted on the day of the NHMRC due, and got funded like a 1.8 million or something. Yeah, the digital one is actually it's fit for many schemes. So we submitted that one to 3 different schemes. It's not the same grant, the variations of the same grant. The one is actually like asthma control in a general population. The other one was actually specifically looking for low socioeconomic. So the same grant is actually tailored for the low socioeconomic. It's a lot of work actually, like if you want to change the scheme, because one scheme was the maximum funding was 2 million. The other one was again 2 million, and the one was successful was actually 2.5 million. So we need to change everything based on the grant, but it's submitted to 3 different grants in 2 weeks time, and one of them was successful. And after that, the same submitted to the clinical trials and cohort grant also.
This is a really good example of, yeah, you've got to repurpose your grants for for lots of schemes, and if you can, find a way to alter the same project so that it fits another scheme, that is ideal, and Dennis has showed how that can work. And what else was I going to say on that? Oh, the other thing I've tried to do is also, I've occasionally turned a grant into a review paper, for example, so then I don't feel like it was such, that of course it wasn't a waste of time, but so you're repurposing it for another use to get another output. So that's another way to think of it. Any other thoughts on these tricky questions?
I think it's like taking a lottery. If you take more lottery, there's the chance of success is high.
Keep entering the lottery. Absolutely. It is a lottery, and it's so true. Are there any questions online? I'll just check the chat. Lunch has just arrived. I'm not sure if Kathy's still on. Yes, we've just got our lunch, so it's not pizza today. No. Looks like some yummy salads and meat. Any other questions? There were a few more that I sort of put together on this slide. When's the right time to go for a big grant as a CIA if you're an ECR? That's another one that I'm sure people have different opinions on. I think it's important to build your track record with small grants, with awards. You know, if you haven't applied for one of the Asthma and Breathing Program awards, you've got till tomorrow. Those things really help build your track record so that when you are ready to go for a bigger grant like an NHMRC or a BEF or whatever, you've already showing that your track record is impressive relative to your opportunity. Yeah, a lot of these questions I don't have answers for. Do you have thoughts on this one, Vanessa? Sure,
yeah, it does depend on what the scheme is, obviously, as well, because, you know, there are those that are ECRs.
Yes.
I remember the first NHMRC grant I ever submitted was, I think it was 2012 or 2011. I got my PhD in 2011. And it was a project grant, and it was kind of a follow-on from my PhD, so I really wanted to do it and put the grant, wrote the grant, and then I remember having a conversation with my mentor, who suggested that it might be better if you know, they were CIA, which I remember at the time kind of broke me a little. But it was also $1 million grant, and I had a PhD for probably not even a year and no track record in funding. And we got that grant, and I don't think I would have got it if I was the CIA. So I think sometimes you have to kind of put the greater good ahead of, you know, wanting that CIA grant so that you get the funding and get the work done. And then that puts you at a much better position for the next grant you go, because you're a CIB on $1 million grant for NHMRC. And I'd say that's helped me in terms of funding over the years, and would agree that that was the right approach.
Yes, I've heard a similar story from someone else who really felt like it was the right approach not to be CIA. My first grant as CIA was, at the time they had a new investigator scheme. So that in that case, it obviously made sense for me to be CIA, and that year was another example of strategy. So Peter put in the MAP study grant that year as a regular project grant, and I put in the VEEP study, which was focused on viral infections, and that was my new investigator project grant, and we both got funded. And so we ended up sort of combining forces and running both those projects through one study. So yeah, it's good to think about those kind of approaches as well. Any other questions down here or comments?
Regarding like a CIA, I think it's better to be a CIB on a successful grant rather than a CIA on an unsuccessful grant.
Yeah. Very true.
At some point, you do have to make that transition as well.
Yeah. Mike, do you have anything you would like to speak to on this question? How can I approach industry for grant opportunities? Or would you like to tell us a short story of your, I think you're one of the people in the team who has been successful with industry funding.
Okay, so I think the key points would probably be talk to them. So there's medical science liaisons, other key industry reps that their job is to talk to us, but they can also tell you what's going on internally within their organisations and what they're interested in. And I think that is really important because if you can tailor what you're proposing to align with their strategy or what they're looking for, then that's like a massive first hurdle. You can also get quite a good feel for if your idea is sort of palatable as well before submitting any kind of application. So that's really important.
The process within industry is quite different, I understand, from my limited understanding. Can you give an example of a process you had to go through to get money from industry?
So the two grants that we've had have been from GSK through their investigator-sponsored studies scheme. So that's a global scheme. So initially you submit an EOI through a web portal, and then they will review that and then they will let you know if it's a proposal of interest, at which point they will, in this case, they ask for full protocol and budget by a certain date. And then, the first project we had, we did have to have some Zoom meetings with GSK Global around study design and the number of people that we were saying we were going to recruit for this study. So they wanted more. And that seemed quite daunting to me, at least, like that you're meeting with GSK Global. But it turned out that GSK Global was a guy called Peter Howarth, who's a professor at the University of Southampton. So he's GSK Global when it comes to respiratory grants. And Peter Gibson knows him quite well. And so it was good, obviously, having Peter's involvement, because prior to the meeting, he was able to tell me who this person was, and you can get an idea. And yeah, so that was good. Where was I going with that? The process. Yeah, so effectively that meeting was a rebuttal opportunity. And then the second grant just went through straight through. The other thing there was actually the university. Then you have to deal with the university and how the two organisations kind of and their expectations and contractual requirements kind of align. So there had to be some negotiations with the university around release of funds, because industry funding tends to be milestone driven, so you don't get all of the money up front, but you need enough money to start the project and pay people. So you can negotiate with the company to a limited extent, I found, on how they'll balance the payments and put things a bit more upfront for you. And then you also have to have an agreement with the university that they will provide some of the funds upfront before they've been able to invoice the company. Otherwise, the whole thing falls down.
So they're the global grants through the ISS program, investigators, sponsored studies. There are other opportunities, however, as well. So in terms of national opportunities, so many of the companies have these ISS programs, but they also have local programs which are kind of grant and donations. And they fall under a myriad of different categories, and you can apply for those without having, and that's for kind of a smaller 50, 60, 70, $80,000 kind of support grant, which would be, you know, really great for MCRs as well to get some funding for their projects. So again, that's through a web-based portal, but they don't just put it on their websites to say these are those. You've got to talk to people, and then they'll kind of link you in.
Thank you, that's really great. Any other questions around the room? I'm aware we're heading towards 1 o'clock. Anyone have a burning question? Thank you to those online who have contributed. I'll just finish with that. It is the season. Thanks, everyone.